The O Cannabis Conference and Expo returns to Toronto June 1st through the 3rd, and there's still some good booth locations available. This exciting event is free for cannabis retailers and will feature Tommy Chong receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at the O Cannabis Industry Awards. For more information about exhibiting or to register to attend, go to ocannabis.com. That's OCANNABIZ.com. Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we're going to take a look at SOPs. And to help us do that is Katrina Glogowski. She's an angel investor and attorney in Seattle. Thanks for being back with us.
Morning, Josh.
So according to the Cannabis Business Times, standard operating procedures can promote product safety, innovation, more productive and efficient processes, ensures product safety, quality, profitability. And if you have continuous improvement methodologies like Six Sigma or lean manufacturing, it can reduce variation. Doing some research, I went back to 2016 to the cannabisbusinessexecutive.com. They had an article about ways to fail in the cannabis industry. And so it was to look at inventory as well as footage, so security cameras, and then financials. So, I mean, almost half a decade later, it's pretty much the same thing.
SOPs are imperative for any business, Josh, but SOPs are mandatory in a highly regulated industry like cannabis. There's no excuse not to have them. I would question any company that does not have extensive SOPs. And if a cannabis company or cannabis related company is coming through with an investment request to me without SOPs, they don't get through the door. It's one of my first questions in due diligence, Josh.
Right. It's pretty important. Every company I've worked at, all of the banks, they have it so that if you're out sick, somebody knows how to do it just by looking at that book. So going back to 2016, there was another article from the Willamette Weekly about 19 ways to fail in cannabis. And number one was loan your kid money to start a dispensary. 2 was start worrying about your taxes in March. 3 was learn how to grow from a hydroponic store. And 4 was be your own bookkeeper. So couple of different financial things in there. We've seen a lot of people not really have financial accountability without CFOs, without market analysts, without even maybe an in-house bookkeeper. It's amazing to me to kind of see in the industry, not even in cannabis, but in general, the lack of financial accountability. Publicly traded companies are probably one of the worst ones at it, just wasting money. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I left Capital One, is because I saw how wasteful they were. I was like, well, how hard can it be? So jumping in the cannabis space, obviously, compliance is a huge issue. And I think just being in compliance makes it that much easier with standard operating procedures. So I went to the only place I thought logical was Homeland Security to kind of give us some questions and see if we are in line or in compliance. And one of those is what capabilities does SOPs apply to? What is a recognized need? Any established agreements? Who's using them? What is the concern being addressed? So just kind of touching on that first introduction of an SOP. Obviously, it's to have enough inventory that you need to be in compliance, as well as to hold people accountable, I think, right? I mean, if you have people that are doing their job, one thing you want to do is make sure that they're doing it correctly.
Josh, I, like you, come from the financial institution industry where SOPs were not only a requirement, but you were audited on the existence of an SOP and your compliance with the SOP. And to sit there without standard operating procedures, there's no excuse for it. And you should have a standard operating procedure, not only for the positions to describe Johnny's job and Sally's job and what the expectations are, that later with employee performance, but you also need to have SOPs for planning. What happens if our trimmer machine breaks? Does the trimmer not work that day? What happens? Who replaces the trimmer? What plans, what contingency plans do you have in place? And then with this lovely coronavirus we're all facing, the SOPs should also address things like disaster planning, contingency planning. What happens when people can't physically go to the office? What happens when the press calls and says, hey, you have the best product since sliced bread? What is the receptionist supposed to say to that? You need an SOP.
Are you there?
Hey, Josh.
I lost you, but you're back now.
I'm here.
So we were talking about why SOPs drive profitability in cannabis. You had made the point about the purpose of an SOP, why write it, like what the objective is. You also talked about the scope, like what you should include in there, as well as I think you mentioned critical incidents like COVID, planned events, day-to-day activities. So then that brings us to our next point here. So SOPs, training requirements. We're going to do another podcast about turnover in the industry and some ways to improve morale. Part of that is a good training program. You'd have a lot less turnover, probably a higher morale, and everything that encompasses that. So you have longevity, you have higher sales team, all of those things with proper training.
I agree, Josh. We need to have SOPs, as we've already discussed, but your employees need to know about the SOPs and how to comply with the SOPs and make sure that they have adequate training. So I totally agree with this slide. It's not enough to have an SOP in the drawer. Your employee need to know what the SOP is.
I think the other thing that an SOP outlines is accountability. So holding people responsible and accountable is a way to get them promoted, I guess. One of the top two things is pay and promotion that most people want. So that's kind of the thing they're looking for, is more responsibility, but also accountability.
This is imperative for an SOP. I don't care if SOP covers one specific individual or position, needs to be ultimately responsible for implementing and monitoring and training for that SOP. Otherwise, the SOPs are meaningless.
I agree. All right. Well, with that, we're going to roll this one up. I want to thank my guest, Katrina Glogowski. She's an angel investor and attorney in Seattle. Appreciate you being back on the podcast.
Thanks, Josh.
Tell me, boy, you make me so bored. You need to walk the other way. I tell you once more. Please get out of my way. I don't want you no more. We're done here, boy. I know you think you're so fine, but you can't see it. I've been wanting to
Hi, my name is Kira Reed, and I'd like to invite you to be inspired by the women who are leading in the cannabis industry. Each week, we will discuss empowerment, leadership, and what it means to be a woman in charge in marijuana, hemp, and CBD. As the founder of the Women Empowered in Cannabis community, I have had the great pleasure to get to know many brilliant and talented women who are CEOs, executives, politicians, advocates, and community leaders that are focused on creating a cannabis economy that is just, fair, and equal. We'll learn how these women make decisions, how they navigate a predominantly male industry, and what they're doing to level the playing field for women. I hope you'll join us.